Hey everyone, this is John from EastCoastArmory.com, and I'm here today with a project update video for this 1/6 scale radio-controlled Armortek Russian T34 85. It's been a while since I've had any updates for this particular build. I've been spending the last year or so focusing on the other 1/6 scale Tiger 1 that was ahead of this guy here on the production line. With that build basically out of the way, I can now focus some time on this guy as well as the King Tiger, which should have actually another update dropping shortly. Anyway, in particular for the T34, since the last video, I've actually hooked up some of the model's electronics, and the tank in this configuration now is fully running. In the last video, I talked about the tracks and the suspension. Since the last video, obviously all the tracks have been assembled, and with the electronics now patched in, I could take this guy out for a test drive. Now, right now, the electronics are obviously very crude with their installation. This is just basically a proof of concept. I usually do this to take the tank on a test drive first, see if there's any problems with the transmission, as well as also with the suspension. If everything is squared away, then I could then focus on more secure mounting apparatuses for the internal electronics. Now, although the system is very crudely arranged, the setup is still fully functional, and this is the basic setup that you need just to get the model up and running. This is true for pretty much all of the Armortek tanks in general. Their basic setup for getting the tracks running is a very simple affair. Now, for the electronics, even though the T34 kits were released back in 2011, under the hood, this model does feature the newest motion packs, which are offered by Armortek. One nice thing about the Armortek kits are that you can have an older generation hull, but upgrade the electronics to their most current set. So electronically, it is on par with their most current releases. Now, one thing I like about their motion control module on their current generations are the simplicity of them. In the older generations, the job of this unit over here would be spread across 2 or 3 separate units. This is described in more detail on videos like the King Tiger running video that I published a little while ago. With vehicles with this generation electronics, it's simplified to a greater degree. Basically, all we have hooked up into the vehicle is the receiver, the batteries, and the motion control module. This guy over here is the power switch. I'll go over more information about that in a second. Now, for the batteries, all Armortek tanks are 24 volt powered. To get your 24 volts, what you do is you take 2 12-volt batteries, hook them up into series circuits, which bumps up the voltage to 24. Now, the batteries that you see here are just placeholders. They will not be the final ones utilized on this build. Now, while on the topic of the batteries, these are lithium-ion batteries, and in recent years I have switched to all lithium-ion power sources for these large-scale RC tanks. Now, on the topic of the batteries, this vendor here is no longer in business, and this company is definitely not recommended for very good reason. I do have a new supplier that supplies the same quality of batteries as these ones here, and that can be found with the URL listed below in the video description. Now, one final word on the batteries, that you notice that these ones here are 12 volt 7 amp hour. The batteries do work, but the amperage is on the lower end, which means a shorter runtime. Now, like I said, these batteries are only being used for testing of the tank's operation. They will not be the batteries that I will commit to for the final assembly. Now, one thing to point out is that unlike the other vehicles like the Tiger, the Sherman, and even the Panthers, where I utilize a much larger size battery, with the T34, that's not going to be necessarily the case, or it's going to take some clever workaround to try to get them to fit inside. The reason why I say that is because with the hull size of the T34 combined with the angles of the hull, you do not have a whole lot of free space on the inside. And with those very large batteries, they do eat up free space very quickly. This also becomes a problem with the turret rotation, as there's a large geared motor that descends into the hull, which is typical on these Armortek tanks. And also, keep in mind, this tank will still need to get a sound system, the speakers, as well as a plethora of other accessories and modules that are going to be added to this build. So obviously the inside is going to be stuffed up way more than it is on even some of my tanks with the engine interior. Because of that, the batteries are probably going to have to be a different type that I generally use on my normal builds. But again, more information on this is to come once I start squaring away the interior portion of the model. So from the batteries, this now brings us to the main power control module box. This acts as the power supply as well as the speed controllers for the main drives. Everything hooks up very quickly. The instructions are very well labeled, and basically you have an output for each of the motors. They patch in to their appropriate locations, and then we have these two receiver connections here that connect to the receiver. Now these units that we have here that are currently not plugged in are for the other components, namely the gun elevation and the turret rotation, and since obviously they're not hooked up yet, there's no point patching them into the radio at this point. There is a very large fuse found on these units. Now the power supply on the older generation Armortek tanks also utilize a nice fuse box, which does come in handy. However, on this model here, rather than utilizing several smaller fuses, there's just one large fuse right here in the center, and it has this nice cutout which makes it easy to get to in case an incident happens and you burn out one of these units. Which the likelihood is pretty rare, specifically if you build the model properly and you do not cross the wrong wires together. The stock fuse should last you a lifetime. Now, on these newer generation Armortek units, one thing that I really do like is the design of the power switch. On the older generations, the power switch would have been attached to the power supply module, which was fairly large in size and would take up a lot of free space. And also, depending on where you're mounting it, would have to alter the orientation of some of the interior layout. With this unit here, it's much smaller in overall size, which makes it easier to stuff in to places like underneath a hatch or some other access point on the vehicle. Also, as you can see, the unit is just connected with a extension cord, basically like a receiver type plug. Now, what's nice about this is that you're not set in stone with the length of this cord. If you utilize a longer cord, you can have the motion control module buried deep inside the confines of the vehicle, but have the switch on the opposite end, close to a hatch. And the only thing connecting it is this simple cord that we have here. Okay, well, I lugged the model out of the shop. Now I'm going to turn it on. To do that, of course, I'm going to turn on the radio. And now I'm going to power the model on. Alright, let's see what she does. Ugh. Hate when that happens. Get out of here. There we go. Alright, looks like it's chewed through. Well, now that was a really successful and a really fun, for that matter, test run. The tank performed absolutely phenomenally. The suspension was working, the gearbox had absolutely no slippage, and the tracks were doing as advertised. Now, if anyone may have noticed, there's this pin sticking out over here. This pin is currently being used as the master pin and is not permanently affixed yet because, again, shortly after the filming of this take, the tracks need to be removed in order for me to continue with the rest of the construction. So the pin is just basically just held in place with friction. Same goes with the opposite side. Obviously, once the model's built, I don't recommend doing this type of format. And if we can recall from the TrackLink video, the way these pins are secured on the Armortek tank is the pin gets inserted in and there's a lock this small little lock pin that keeps it in place and prevents it from wiggling out. Now, the other track links were secured in place via the lock pin, and as you can see, zero issues arose from them working themselves loose. Now, while I was running the tank, I did pay attention to the sprocket area. The reason why I was looking at it had to do with the face detailing modification that I made to this unit earlier. As we recall from an earlier project update video, the face detailing that you see here is not part of the Armortek CNC turning. Instead, it is a 3D printed detail face, which is then affixed to the Armortek sprocket. Obviously, this area is going to endure a lot of wear, and so after the running I saw today, the piece held up very, very well and is definitely suitable for the rigors of RC use. Another area that I was paying attention to were these swing arm detail plates that I mentioned in another video update. You can also see the metal bump stops have also held up pretty well with the rigors of the test run that I just took the tank on. Moving from the bump stop now brings us to the track pin alignment plate. The plate does have some scratch marks on it, however these are just superficial, and more than likely these look like they were made when the track was first installed and the track broke itself in. I'm not seeing any other deep gouges or any other type of damage that can cause concern. Now, since the plate is made out of metal, it should be more durable enough for the type of running that this tank should ever see. One final area that I was really paying attention to were the suspension spring mechanisms that I mentioned in the last video. Just like in the last video, I mentioned that the vehicle's height needed to be modified to make it slightly lower to the ground, giving a little bit more accuracy. One of the other mods that I made was the addition of these little neoprene washers to act as buffers, and if you look carefully when the tank is running, you should be able to see these units actuating and the buffer doing its job. Same thing was also done to the front suspension cluster as well. This did receive a bit of modification compared to the stock original, and from what one can see from the test run, performed absolutely perfectly. Well, now that the test run is out of the way, the tank can get back into the shop where I can start digging into the interior layout and start fleshing out the inside of this vehicle, getting it ready for the next build-up. Until then, that wraps up this project update video for this 1/6 scale radio-controlled Armortek Russian T34-85. If you like this video and aren't already a subscriber, be sure to subscribe to the ECA channel, which is a great way to keep in the loop of new posted content, be it either project update videos like this guy over here, or smaller scale model showcase videos that frequently get posted. Another way to stay in the loop of new posted content is by liking us on Facebook. There I have photographs of this particular build that have been posted since the project start, as well as pictures of the other smaller and larger scales that are showcased on the ECA channel. Furthermore, don't forget to swing by eastcoastarmory.com for more 1/6 and 1/16 scale builds and detailed components. Thanks for watching.